For 49 years, the man who lit the first candle was the man who took her. On a Saturday night in September 1975, in the small tobacco farming community of Harnett Falls, North Carolina, a 22-year-old schoolteacher named Della Mae Corbin walked out of a church social and never made it home. She left behind a half-eaten slice of pound cake, a sweater she'd forgotten on the back of her chair, and a fiancé who would spend the next half-century performing her memory for a community that never once suspected him. Every September, Raymond Pruitt lit a candle and held it above his head. Every September, he gave the same speech at the edge of the same church parking lot, the one she'd walked out of and into nothing. Della Mae deserved better from all of us, he would say. His voice always broke on cue. We have to keep looking. He organized 49 of those vigils, 49 years of candles, 49 years of a town that never stopped grieving, never stopped trusting, and never once looked at the man in front of them. But to understand what happened when the truth finally surfaced, and what it cost the people who had loved Raymond Pruitt as much as they had loved Della Mae Corbin, you first have to understand who Della Mae was, and what kind of town could hold a secret that large for that long without ever knowing it. Harnett Falls in 1975 was the kind of place that doesn't quite exist anymore. A population of just under 3,000, pressed up against the flat tobacco fields of central North Carolina, where the nights smelled of red clay and cured leaf, and the summers ran long and brutal and golden. There was one stoplight, one diner, the Pinecrest, with its red vinyl stools and a pie case that was never less than half full, and a Baptist church that sat at the center of everything the town understood about itself. Della Mae Corbin had grown up 3 houses down from that church. She was the eldest daughter of Roy and Vivian Corbin, and from the time she was small, she was the sort of person a community organizes itself around, without quite realizing it. She taught 2nd grade at Harnett Falls Elementary, and her students kept the drawings they made in her classroom long after they outgrew the habit of keeping things. She brought casseroles to sick neighbors without being asked. She sang in the choir on the 3rd Sunday of every month, her voice, according to everyone who heard it, the kind that made you stop what you were doing. She drove a 1969 Ford Fairlane the color of old mustard. She kept a mason jar of wildflowers on her kitchen windowsill. She replaced them every Thursday, without fail, and she was 3 months away from marrying Raymond Pruitt, a 30-year-old insurance agent from the next county over, who had come to Harnett Falls the previous year and inserted himself into church life with an energy that everyone found admirable. They made a handsome couple. Everyone said so. Raymond was tall and well-spoken, the kind of man who remembered birthdays and held doors and arrived early to help set up folding chairs. Vivian Corbin told her daughter he was the kind of man you waited for. Della Mae laughed and said she knew. That Saturday in September, the 20th, 1975, Della Mae arrived at the church social at 6:15 in the evening. She brought a pound cake. She laughed at Pastor Glendon's terrible jokes. She stayed until nearly 9 o'clock, talking with the women from the choir, and then she put on her coat, kissed Raymond on the cheek, and told him she was tired and heading home. The church was 4/10 of a mile from her front door. She had walked it 100 times. That was the last time anyone who loved her saw Della Mae Corbin alive. At 9:47 that night, Raymond Pruitt arrived at the Corbin house asking if Della Mae had made it home safely. Vivian Corbin, who had been sitting up waiting, opened the door and felt the bottom drop out of her world. She had not come home. Raymond called the Harnett Falls Police Department from the rotary phone in the Corbin kitchen. Deputy Harold Sykes arrived by 10:15. By midnight, neighbors were combing the road between the church and the Corbin house with flashlights. They found one thing on that road. A single tan pump, Della Mae's right shoe, sitting in the gravel pull-off beside the old Lawson farm fence, 7/10 of a mile from the church. It was positioned upright, as though it had been placed rather than lost, as though it had been left for someone to find. Search parties went out the following morning. The county sheriff's office expanded into adjacent fields. By Wednesday, the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation had sent 2 agents to assist. By Friday, Della Mae Corbin had been missing for 5 days. No second shoe. No purse. No sign of her Fairlane, which had been parked in the church lot the night she disappeared. No witnesses. No one had seen or heard anything on that 4/10 of a mile stretch of road. What happened in those 47 minutes, between Della Mae kissing Raymond goodbye and Vivian Corbin opening her door to find him standing alone in the dark, would define the next 49 years of Harnett Falls. Raymond Pruitt was beside himself. He organized the search parties. He posted flyers. He drove every back road in the county. SPI agent Donald Reese, the lead investigator assigned to the case, would later note in his case file that Raymond Pruitt was among the most cooperative and visibly distressed individuals I have encountered in 20 years of work. Reese interviewed him 3 times in the first 2 weeks. They found nothing to hold him on. The case's first serious suspect was a farmhand named Clovis Earle, who had been seen on the Lawson property the week before Della Mae vanished. He had a prior assault conviction from Robeson County, no alibi for the night of the 20th, and, according to his employer, a habit of watching women on the road from the farm's front fence. Deputies brought him in on October 4th. He was questioned for 11 hours. He wept and denied everything, and the SPI agent from Raleigh came down specifically to evaluate him. There was no physical evidence connecting him to Della Mae. No blood in his truck. No personal items. A polygraph examination was inconclusive, and on October 9th, Clovis Earle was released. The investigation stalled. What Donald Reese did not know, what wouldn't surface for another 5 decades, was that Raymond Pruitt had driven that same 4/10 of a mile stretch the night before the social. Alone, timing the walk. What happened to the only person who could have told investigators that? A gas station attendant 2 miles away who had seen Raymond's car pulled over on that road on the night of September 19th, was that he moved to Charlotte in the spring of 1976, and his name was never cross-referenced against the witness canvas. It was the kind of failure that haunts a case forever, and this one would be haunted for a very long time. By 1980, 5 years had passed. The Fairlane was never found. Della Mae Corbin was declared legally dead in 1982, a proceeding that Vivian Corbin did not attend because she could not bring herself to sit in that courtroom and listen to a judge put a legal boundary around her daughter's absence. Raymond Pruitt never left Harnett Falls. He moved from his rental apartment into a small house on Bellevue Road and continued selling insurance and attending First Baptist. The first candlelight vigil was held in September 1976. Raymond's idea, Raymond's planning, Raymond's invitation list. 112 people showed up. Vivian Corbin stood at the edge of the parking lot and held her candle with both hands. Raymond stood next to her. He always stood next to her. By 1985, a decade had passed. The reward posters in the Pinecrest Diner window had faded to near white, but nobody took them down. The children who had been in Della Mae's second-grade class were adults now, some of them with second graders of their own. The church replaced its parking lot lights, and for one season there was a quiet conversation about whether to move the vigil to the park, but Raymond felt strongly that it should stay where it had always been, and everyone agreed. By 1995, 20 years. Donald Reese had retired to Wilmington, but he kept the Corbin case file in a green metal box in his garage. He looked through it every few years. Something about Raymond Pruitt had never fully settled in his mind. Something he could never quite articulate. Some small thing that never translated into evidence. In 1997, he drove up to Harnett Falls and had coffee with the current sheriff. They talked for an hour. Nothing new had surfaced. He drove back to Wilmington. The vigils continued. Raymond Pruitt became, in time, one of those figures that small communities produce. A person whose grief gives the town permission to keep grieving collectively. Mothers who had lost children came to the Corbin vigil. Families whose missing persons cases had gone cold stood beside him. He was photographed for the Harnett County Courier every September for 3 decades running. In 2009, the state legislature issued a commendation for his advocacy for cold case victims. He framed it and put it on the wall of the insurance agency. Vivian Corbin died in 2011 at 84 years old, still not knowing what had happened to her daughter. She had asked Raymond to speak at her funeral service. He did. Della Mae's younger sister, Patricia Corbin Stokes, had left Harnett Falls after their mother's death and moved to Greensboro. But she never stopped. Every year she came back for September 20th. Every year she stood at the edge of that parking lot. And every year, Raymond Pruitt stood beside her and held his candle up and said the same words he had always said. Della Mae deserved better from all of us. We have to keep looking. Patricia Stokes believed him. For 49 years, she believed him. Every case on this channel represents weeks of digging through records, verifying facts, and piecing together real lives that deserved better. If this is the kind of story you believe needs to be told, take a second to like this video and subscribe. Drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Your support is what makes this work possible. Now let's get back to Della Mae. In the spring of 2024, the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation launched a cold case initiative under the direction of Special Agent Marisol Fontaine, a 13-year veteran of the Spy who had spent her career working unsolved homicides from the 1970s and 1980s. The program used genetic genealogy, the same process that had broken the Golden State Killer case wide open and had since been refined to a degree that made it viable for cases with very small or degraded biological samples. In January 2024, the Harnett County Evidence Storage Facility was audited for the first time in 11 years. Among the items cataloged was a paper evidence bag from September 1975, sealed with wax and signed by the original receiving officer. Inside were 3 items: a single tan pump, a fabric swatch, and a cotton handkerchief found at the scene, documented in the original case file, and never re-examined with modern forensic tools. The handkerchief had been found folded in the gravel beside the shoe. The original 1975 report noted it as possibly belonging to the victim. Unconfirmed, it had sat in that bag for 49 years. On a Tuesday morning in March 2024, forensic technician Brenna Okafor prepared a sample from the handkerchief's interior fold, the area least exposed to environmental degradation, and submitted it to the SBI's Genetic Genealogy Unit. The process works by extracting DNA from biological material and uploading a genetic profile to public ancestry databases, the same sites where ordinary people search their family trees, then tracing distant relatives backward toward a single unknown contributor. 2 weeks later, Agent Fontaine received a call from the genealogy unit. She was in her car in the parking lot of a Raleigh coffee shop when her phone rang. She listened. Then she pulled out her notebook and wrote down a name. The name was Pruitt. She read it again. She called the unit back and asked them to verify. They already had. Raymond Pruitt's Dina left on the interior fold of a handkerchief that he had dropped at the scene of Della Mae Corbin's disappearance in September 1975 and never retrieved, had been sitting in a county evidence room for 49 years. Preserved by the dry North Carolina autumn and a sealed paper bag and the bureaucratic luck of a facility that had never been flooded, never been moved, and never once thrown anything away. The next morning, Agent Fontaine drove to Harnett Falls. What she found when she began pulling the threads was not a mystery. It was a portrait. Raymond Pruitt, now 78 years old, had lived the last 49 years under a cover that he had constructed with extraordinary care. Neighbors described him as the most loyal friend the Corbin family ever had. His insurance clients called him reliable and trustworthy. The current pastor of First Baptist had once delivered a sermon about Raymond's example of how grief could be transformed into purpose. 3 different cold case families had named him in statements to the press as the kind of person who gives you hope. The investigation that Agent Fontaine conducted over the following 6 weeks established what had happened on the night of September 20th, 1975, records recovered from Raymond Pruitt's personal effects, including a journal that had been stored in a trunk in his attic, confirmed a version of events that the original investigation had never considered, because the original investigation had accepted Raymond Pruitt's grief at face value. Court documents filed in Harnett County in May 2024 would allege that Della Mae Corbin had, in the weeks before her death, informed Raymond Pruitt that she intended to end their engagement. The specific reason would be contained in letters she had written to a close friend in Fayetteville. Letters that had never been produced in the 1975 investigation because the friend had not known they were relevant. The friend, now in her mid-70s, had kept them in a shoebox for 5 decades. She provided them to Agent Fontaine in April 2024, and she wept when she did. Della Mae had known something was wrong. She had put it in writing, and she had been dead within 3 weeks of writing it. The arrest came on a Wednesday morning in June 2024. Agent Fontaine and 2 Harnett County Sheriff's deputies drove to Raymond Pruitt's house on Bellevue Road at 7:45 in the morning. He answered the door in his bathrobe. He looked at Fontaine's badge, and then he looked at her face, and according to one of the deputies present, what crossed his expression was not surprise. It was something closer to relief. He did not speak during the drive. He did not speak during the processing. He sat in the Harnett County interview room for 40 minutes while his court-appointed attorney was located. And he sat with his hands folded on the table in front of him and looked at the wall. His attorney arrived. They conferred privately for 20 minutes. And then, Raymond Pruitt told Agent Fontaine, in a voice that was very quiet and very steady, what had happened on the road between the First Baptist Church and the Corbin house on the night of September 20th, 1975. The record reflects that he spoke for 41 minutes without being interrupted. He asked about Vivian Corbin. He was told she had died in 2011. He nodded slowly, as though he had been waiting for that confirmation, and he said nothing more. In the Pinecrest diner that same afternoon, the pie case sat untouched, while the lunch crowd talked about nothing else. People who had stood next to Raymond Pruitt for 49 Septembers tried to reconstruct every year in light of what they now knew. One woman, who had been a child in Della Mae Corbin's second-grade class in 1974, was quoted in the Harnett County Courier saying, "He held my hand at the vigil in 2019, after my husband died. He held my hand and told me Della Mae was watching over all of us." She paused for a long moment. I don't know how to put those two things in the same room. Raymond Pruitt was charged with first-degree murder and was remanded to the Harnett County Detention Center. His trial is scheduled for March 2025. He has not entered a public plea, and his attorney has declined to comment further on the case. Patricia Corbin Stokes was in her kitchen in Greensboro when Agent Fontaine called her. She sat down on the floor because she couldn't trust her legs. Her daughter found her there 20 minutes later, phone in her lap, not crying, just breathing. She told a Harnett County reporter the following week, "I used to think about how Mama never got an answer. It was the one thing she asked for, and she died without it. And I thought maybe that was the cruelest part." She looked at her hands. "But now I think the crueler part was that she was comforted, in those last years, by the man who took Della from her. And she never knew. And I think that might be the hardest thing I will ever have to sit with." Della Mae Corbin's remains have not yet been located. Raymond Pruitt's cooperation with investigators regarding that question is ongoing, and the Harnett Falls Police Department has indicated that search efforts are being coordinated with SBI personnel. But Patricia Stokes has requested that the vigil continue this September, the 50th, and that it be held where it has always been held, in the parking lot of First Baptist. She is organizing it herself for the first time. She has already started the invitation list. Because, she says, the vigil was never really his. The candle was never his to hold. The memory of Della Mae belonged to everyone who loved her, and it belongs to them still. And 49 years of a man exploiting their grief cannot change the fact that what they were doing every September was true. Their love for Della Mae was true. Their refusal to forget was true. "We kept looking," Patricia said. "We kept looking for 49 years. And the truth found us eventually." There is something in this case that goes beyond the horror of what Raymond Pruitt did, and there is horror enough in that. What this case reveals is the particular cruelty of a person who understands grief well enough to perform it, for long enough, convincingly enough, that the performance becomes the community's only frame of reference. The people of Harnett Falls were not fooled because they were naive. They were fooled because they were loving. Because they believed that what Raymond Pruitt showed them was real. And it is worth sitting with the fact that, in that belief, they were not wrong about grief itself. They were only wrong about him. Della Mae Corbin was 22 years old. She brought pound cake to church socials. She replaced the wildflowers on her kitchen windowsill every Thursday. She had 32 students whose drawings she graded carefully and returned with small notes in her handwriting at the bottom. She had a voice that made people stop what they were doing. She had a future that was entirely her own, and it was taken from her on a stretch of gravel road in the dark, 4/10 of a mile from a church she had attended her entire life. She deserved better. 49 years late, the truth finally agreed. Before we go, 3 questions for you. Do you believe a case closed by a confession after nearly 50 years can genuinely constitute justice, or is justice something that must arrive in time to matter? What detail in this case strikes you as the most significant failure, the evidence that went unexamined for 49 years, or the witness who was never found in 1975? And what does it say about grief and about community that a town could be held together for half a century by the very person responsible for its wound? Leave your thoughts below. This comment section has some of the most thoughtful people on the platform, and we read every word. Justice came for Della Mae Corbin after 49 years. Stories like hers are why this work matters and why it cannot stop. If you believe that truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More solved cold cases are waiting in the description below. Thank you for watching.